feeling like you're wading through more digital mud than clear water lately.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're definitely not alone if the internet feels like it's just serving up endless distractions and, well, sometimes blatant attempts to separate you from your cache.
That frustration you're describing, that sense of being bombarded by content that grabs your attention but just leaves you empty.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse, actively tries to mislead you. That's precisely what we're digging into today.
Exactly. You, our listener, raised a really important point about this. The current state of the online world, particularly social media, and the worrying direction it seems to be heading.
Right.
We've sifted through some, well, compelling analysis specifically, some really thought-provoking perspectives we found. And our goal, as always, is to kind of get to the heart of this issue.
Yeah, to understand what's really going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
We want to go beyond just stating the obvious, that there's a lot of noise online, and really explore the potential futures, like what could happen next.
Both the good and the bad, right?
Right. Exactly. The encouraging possibilities and the more concerning ones. And we want to do this in a way that gives you a clearer picture without, overwhelming you with detail.
Yeah, keep it focused.
And honestly, there were definitely some angles in this material that made me reconsider my own assumptions a bit.
Okay, so let's jump in then. We all recognize that feeling, don't we?
Yeah.
Strolling and just being hit with this wave of what feels like digital junk food.
Totally.
And then, yeah, lurking in between are these flashing red flags of potential scams. But it was interesting to see that the initial thoughts in our analysis actually pointed towards some potential upsides.
Yeah, that was a bit surprising.
What were some of those initial glimmers of hope?
Well, what's interesting to consider is that the sheer scale of this problem, the overwhelming amount of low-quality content and scams could actually force a shift.
How so?
The idea is that platforms might reach a point where they have to prioritize more authentic, valuable information just to maintain, well, any semblance of credibility.
Ah, okay. So self-preservation almost.
Kind of. This could mean a real ramp-up in how they manage content. Trying harder to filter things.
Right. The analysis mentioned the possibility of platforms leaning more heavily on things like AI and human moderators to try and filter out the noise.
Exact.
It feels like a never-ending game of cat and mouse, though, doesn't it?
It really does. And, the other potential positive hinges on how users react to this environment.
Okay, so how we respond.
Yeah. As you're constantly exposed to this kind of low-value stuff, the thinking goes that you might become more selective, maybe more critical of what you're engaging with online, and actively start seeking out more trustworthy sources. It's almost like developing a kind of digital palate you get tired of the empty calories.
So a kind of digital fatigue leading to a more conscious effort to, curate our online experiences.
Yeah.
That's an interesting angle.
It is, but then there's always a but, isn't there?
There usually is. The analysis also presented a much more, shall we say, grounded perspective on human behavior.
It did. The source material puts forward a strong counterpoint, and it really boils down to a pretty fundamental view of human nature.
Which is?
Well, the argument is that hoping for a widespread increase in user discernment might be optimistic.
Yeah.
Because, as one point in the analysis states quite directly, the essence of people is laziness. Or maybe inertia is a better word.
Right.
Sure.
So the idea there is that even when faced with a barrage of superficial content and, potential threats, people will still naturally gravitate towards what requires the least effort and offers the most immediate, albeit fleeting satisfaction.
Exactly. This touches on that psychological draw towards immediate gratification. It just takes less mental energy, right, to watch a short, entertaining video than to really engage with something more in depth.
Yeah.
And when you factor in how much easily digestible content is constantly being pushed at us, the motivation to actively seek out something more meaningful it can weaken for a lot of people.
And what about the idea of the platforms stepping up? Really cracking down on the bad stuff. The analysis seemed a bit skeptical there too, didn't it?
Yes, very much so. There's a definite realism about the limitations of platform regulation.
Like what?
Well, the issue of gray area content,
Right.
That's a significant hurdle. Content that operates right on the edge of violating rules, making it really tricky to take down.
The stuff that bends the rules but doesn't technically break them.
Precisely. And then you have the constant ingenuity of users who are always finding new ways to work around any regulations that are implemented.
So it's a bit like trying to fix a leaky dam with constantly shifting holes.
That's a good analogy.
And if this more pessimistic view holds true, What could be some of the bigger, longer-term consequences?
The analysis raises some pretty serious red flags. One major concern is a potential erosion of trust, a big one.
Erosion of trust in what specifically?
Mm.
The platforms, the internet
Yeah.
itself.
Both, I think. If the internet continues to be seen as unreliable, a breeding ground for misinformation and scams, people might just start to disengage, trust it less overall.
Wow. That could have really significant knock-on effects for everything from online commerce to just our ability to access reliable information on important topics.
Absolutely. And it could also deepen existing social divides.
How so?
Well, those who have the critical thinking skills and maybe the resources to effectively navigate the online landscape, identify credible info, they might benefit or at least be okay.
Right.
But those who lack those skills could become even more vulnerable to being misled or, frankly, exploited. It could create a real digital underclass.
Yeah, that makes sense. This brings us back to this core idea you mentioned, this human inertia.
Hmm.
It really does seem like a key piece of the puzzle here.
It's central, yeah.
Yeah.
The sources emphasize how this fundamental human tendency, favoring low effort, immediately engaging content, really shapes what dominates our online consumption.
And it's not just us choosing it.
No, exactly. It's not just a passive preference. The platforms themselves play a huge role in reinforcing it.
Right. It's almost like the platforms are designed to tap into this inherent tendency, feed the beast, so to speak.
Precisely. The analogy used in the material about platform algorithms creating information cocoons is a really insightful one.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, these algorithms are designed to maximize user engagement, right? Keep you scrolling, keep you clicking, and they do this by feeding you more of what you've already clicked on or watched.
Okay.
So if you engage with shallow entertainment or maybe even misleading stuff, that's what you'll likely keep seeing. It just further reinforces that pattern of consumption.
It becomes this self-feeding loop where low-value content thrives because the system rewards it with attention.
Exactly. And the platforms, even if they have, potential aspirations to improve quality, they're kind of caught in this algorithmic logic.
That's a crucial point. There's an inherent tension there, isn't there?
A huge tension. Platforms often rely on high engagement metrics, clicks, watch time for their revenue, that's the bottom line,
Yeah.
and content that's highly engaging, even if it lacks substance or is problematic, can be very effective at driving those metrics.
So while they might say they want to promote quality,
Their underlying business model can sometimes inadvertently incentivize the opposite. And like we said, effective regulation is incredibly challenging, given how easy it is to get around rules and the limits of AI in truly understanding context and nuance.
okay, so it paints a somewhat concerning picture if we just focus on this pull of human inertia and the difficulties of platform oversight.
It does lean that way initially.
But the analysis did offer some counter-arguments, right? Some reasons to think that the future isn't entirely set in stone by this.
Exactly. Yeah, it wasn't all doom and gloom. While these are powerful forces, they aren't the only ones shaping the online world.
Okay, like what else is in the mix?
Well, we also have social and cultural feedback mechanisms that can drive change. Think about it. When the negative real-world consequences of misinformation or harmful content become undeniable.
Like major social events triggered by online stuff.
Precisely. Things like social unrest or public health crises linked to online falsehoods. The resulting public and media attention can really pressure platforms to take more serious action.
We've definitely seen examples where public outcry has forced platforms to change their policies, haven't we? Or at least become more aggressive in their moderation.
We have. It shows that external pressure can work. And then there's the whole role of law and policy.
Formal regulation.
Yeah. Things like the EU's Digital Services Act are examples of these external pressures pushing for greater accountability and responsibility from these big online platforms.
So setting a baseline for what's expected.
These legal frameworks can establish rules of the road, so to speak. So it's not just relying on the platform's internal motivations, which can be conflicted. There are external forces trying to shape things.
That's important.
Yeah.
What else?
And finally, we shouldn't overlook the impact of user-driven initiatives, things people are doing themselves.
Like what?
Well, think about online communities and even whole platforms specifically created to foster high-quality content and actively combat misinformation.
Okay, niche communities maybe?
Yeah, like specialized professional forums or knowledge-sharing platforms that have really strong moderation. These demonstrate that there is a segment of users who actively seek out and, really value more substantive online spaces.
So while the big mainstream platforms might be struggling with this stuff, there are these like smaller ecosystems of quality and more discerning users emerging.
Exactly. Pockets of resistance, maybe?
That's a more encouraging thought. Okay,
Yeah.
so this brings us to thinking about potential future scenarios. What kind of internet landscape might we see develop from all these competing forces?
Well, one distinct possibility mentioned is a greater stratification of content, a bigger split.
Stratification, meaning,
We might see a clearer division. On one hand, very high quality, maybe niche content for specific audiences willing to seek it out or pay for it.
okay,
And on the other hand, a much larger mainstream dominated by more entertainment-focused, potentially lower-value content designed for mass consumption.
and the downside of that is?
This could, unfortunately, really exacerbate that information inequality we talked about earlier, where access to reliable, deep information becomes even more dependent on your existing knowledge, your networks, maybe even your wallet.
That almost sounds like a return to a kind of information divide, but maybe along different lines than we've seen before, like digital haves and have-nots in terms of quality.
In a sense, yes. And layered on top of that, the ongoing tension between the need for regulation and the principles of free speech will undoubtedly continue to shape things. That's not going away.
Finding that balance.
Yeah, finding a more nuanced and adaptable approach to regulation, one that encourages quality without, stifling legitimate expression, that's going to be a huge challenge moving forward.
It feels like a really delicate balancing act, really tricky.
It absolutely is. But, there's also the potential for a slow but gradual increase in user awareness. It's not impossible.
The first positive point we discussed.
Right. As digital literacy improves, maybe through education, and people become more aware of online manipulation tactics, we might see a subtle shift over time in how people choose to engage.
So critical thinking skills become paramount.
Key. Absolutely key. So maybe not a sudden transformation, but perhaps a slow evolution towards more informed online behavior.
Okay, slow progress is still progress, I guess. Now, a really interesting point that came up later in our sources, kind of a twist, was a shift in focus towards the role of artificial intelligence in all of this.
Yes, that was a fascinating addition. The analysis makes the argument that while the current state of the internet has largely been, quote, determined by human nature up to this point.
Our inertia, our desire for easy stuff.
Exactly. That whole dynamic is now facing significant new pressures from the rapid advancements and, importantly, the widespread implementation of AI.
How so? I mean, beyond just AI generating more content, maybe more spam. What's the deeper impact discussed here?
Well, the perspective put forward is quite provocative. It suggests that as AI-driven automation increasingly displaces jobs and traditional livelihoods for many people.
Which is happening, or predicted to happen more and more.
Right. This growing economic pressure can unfortunately push some individuals towards, let's say, less scrupulous means of obtaining resources. And that can manifest online as an increase in things like fraud and scams.
Wow. Okay, so it's less about a sudden surge in inherently bad intentions or people suddenly becoming worse,
Not necessarily.
and more about a reaction to economic anxieties and pressures created by technological change itself. That's a really sobering way to look at it.
It is. It reframes the issue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It moves beyond simply blaming users for their consumption habits or even just platforms for their algorithms and highlights these broader societal and economic forces that are influencing online behavior in really significant ways. The ground is shifting under our feet because of AI.
So pulling all of this together then, it sounds like the future of the internet is this incredibly complex interplay. You've got our fundamental human tendencies, our inertia.
The pull towards easy gratification.
Then you've got the strategies and the very real limitations of the platforms themselves.
Yep, their business models, their regulatory challenges.
Then there's the ongoing push and pull of social and cultural feedback, public outcry, media attention,
Those external pressures, yeah.
and the slowly evolving landscape of regulation. And now, increasingly, this massive X factor of artificial intelligence.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. The initial concerns that you, our listener, brought to our attention and the really diverse perspectives within the sources we've explored today, they all point to this dynamic, multi-layered challenge. There's no single cause, no single solution.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, it's clear that there are no easy answers here, are there?
Definitely not.
We've looked at that tension between our desire for easy entertainment and the crucial need for reliable, quality information. We've seen the very real challenges in regulating these massive global online platforms.
And how human nature makes that even harder.
And now this increasingly significant influence of artificial intelligence impacting both our online behavior and the online environment itself in ways we're probably just beginning to understand.
Mm. This in-depth look, hopefully tailored to your desire for understanding without feeling, completely overwhelmed,
Right.
it really reveals a complex picture. There are some very real challenges ahead for sure, but also these potential pathways for positive change, even if they're slow or difficult.
And it leaves us with a really important question to think about, doesn't it? For you, the listener, to mull over.
What's that?
Considering all these factors, the pull of our own inertia, the pressures on platforms, the economic shifts driven by AI, what active role do you believe individual users can actually play in shaping a more informative, maybe a more trustworthy internet in the years to come?
That's a great question. It shifts the focus back to individual agency amidst these huge forces.
Right. It feels like that's maybe the next level of this deep dive we all need to undertake personally.
Yeah.
How do we navigate this? What power do we actually have?
Indeed. The future of the digital world isn't just something that's happening to us passively. It's something we are all actively participating in creating, every single day with every click, every share, every choice we make online.
Yeah.
Continuing to explore these dynamics and think critically about our own engagement, our own habits, that seems absolutely essential moving forward.